Anna, hi, how are you?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Mike?
It's great to see you. For those of you listening or watching the podcast, Anna and I were students together at the same time, although I think she was a bit ahead of me in the program that we both went to for sports psychology. So we're sort of reconnecting here and we're going to talk to Anna about her own experiences. So I guess to get started, um, like I think we were talking about before we started recording, we both are in our second life, second career. So what led you to sports psychology?
You know, it, my first career was in marketing communications. So I worked for a lot of retailers in the San Francisco Bay Area, writing product copy, editing product copy. If you ever received one of those mega catalogs in the mail from Restoration Hardware, I used to proofread those. And I hit this point where I really just wanted to do more work with people. I felt like I wasn't making the impact in the world I wanted to. And so I just went on this journey to rediscover what it was that I wanted to do with my
Hmm.
career, with my life. I didn't think it was writing about products anymore.
Yeah.
And I'd always had this interest in psychology. My mom is a therapist. My stepdad is in IO psychology. He doesn't
Hmm.
call him a therapist for companies. And so I saw these different worlds and different options in the how to apply an interest in psychology, but I didn't really want to do either of those. And so
Hmm.
I just kept digging and digging and digging and realized that sports psychology was a field. And as a former athlete, it's like, hold on, we can work with just athletes? Like, sign me up. This is it. It was just this light bulb moment after quite a while of digging and researching and thinking and reflecting, and then just stumbling upon it and being like, this is it. This is what I
Yeah.
want to do.
Yeah. And it's interesting because and I don't know that I knew that coming into this conversation. And I think that our backgrounds are really similar because I did the same thing. I sort of got to this point in my career where it was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I'm not satisfied, but it was like, what do I want to do when I grow up? And
Yeah.
after the doing the research and the work, it was like this confluence of I want to help people, but I would love to help them in the sport context versus maybe being something like a therapist or a psychologist, clinical psychologist. So I mean, it's great that we we have that commonality. So,
Yeah.
so tell me about the process of deciding to go back to school and what that was like to go back to school after having been working for, whatever, 10 years.
It was certainly a leap. Going from working 9 to 5, working in the city, I worked in San Francisco for many
Hmm.
years. It was a big transition to being a student again. But at the same time, I think I was so ready. I was so invested in what we were studying in that program that I just dove right in and loved it. I put everything behind being a student of this new field and really learning as much as I could to support my future self. That honestly, I loved it. However big of a transition it actually was. Like, I did the program in person, which was a really big benefit, I think, for me, because I started to build this completely new community that I didn't have before going back to school. And so it was a fun transition, but definitely different than, working with marketing teams, working alongside executives, having a manager. It was a very different experience, but kind of
Hmm.
a freeing one at that.
For sure. And I had a very similar experience. I mean, I was out of school for almost 20 years when I went back, but it was like this amazing, like, just deep dive into doing the work. And,
Yeah.
I think that it informs my work now as a sports psychology professional in that it required this faith, right? This growth mindset,
Mhm.
this process orientation of like, I don't know how
Yeah.
long this is going to take. I don't know where the hell I'm going with this, but like, I'm just going to focus on what I can control now. So when I come out the
Yeah.
other side, like I'm in a position to do something that I want to do, even though I have no idea what it's going to look like. I mean, does it resonate?
Yes. 100% resonates. And even I think going back to school as an adult, like I think immediately within the first quarter was called the class mom, and I'm like, I'm not even that old, but it was kind of fun to walk into this situation with that life experience and to be able to I don't know. I don't know if that's something you
Yeah.
want to include or not. But it
No,
was
yeah.
definitely I definitely resonate with what you're saying. It was this huge trust in the process, feeling a little bit like an outsider because we're coming in after having been out of school for so long, having had this
Hmm.
career already, feeling like, didn't I already make this choice? I have my degree. I had a career. What am I doing? But
Yeah.
it absolutely, it absolutely was the right decision.
Yeah. And I agree with that. It was absolutely the right decision for me too. So I never have a regret about it. And I guess, to give people who are listening a little bit of background. So the way it worked for us was we had basically a year of classes. And then after a year of doing our sort of, typical vanilla course requirements, we had to move into field work or internships. And we
Mhm.
started to do the work under supervision and starting to apply what we've learned. And so thinking about that sort of just came to me, like, what was it like for you to go through your field work or your internships? Like, how did you feel? Like, what were the things that challenged you when you first started to like be on your own?
Oh, I have to admit, I loved it. I loved it. Again, it was this deep sense of, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Mm,
This is the work that I want to be. So that continuously reinforced throughout the course of the internship process. I think one of the hardest things was being totally new and bad at something again. Again,
yeah,
it was that complete trust in the process that was sometimes very hard, and realizing like I don't know how to do this and I need some
yeah,
help to
help.
figure it out. It was really humbling. At when I think you
Yeah,
you go so long in your career and you build up this confidence. We now know, right, how confidence builds, and to go back to square one was it was really humbling. And so I think it was really but it was a great experience
mm,
to be put in that situation again,
hmm,
um, as an adult, because then it makes you more relatable to the people that you're working with, who are
that's a good
in that
point.
process of developing their skills and everything. And so it was a great position to be in, to not only learn and practice what we were learning in class, but to practice the skills on ourselves in the situation that was so new. And you're learning so much on the
Mm,
fly and you have to
yes.
fail so much. It was hard, but I think that makes us, or at least it made me feel more equipped to help my athletes now through their bouts of failure and trusting the process and all that.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think the word that comes to mind for me is gratitude. I mean, sort of the
Yeah.
appreciation for the fact that after all these years of not having been in school and like just sort of going through the motions, that's the way I felt in my work, to have the chance to go through and like really struggle, in that
Mm-hmm.
learning process and really appreciate that I'm sort of going from square, zero, from the very, very bottom, the very bottom of the barrel where I know nothing, to actually like going through this transformation from that to, hey, I'm now a qualified professional. I have a master's degree, and then ultimately sitting for our CMPC, certified mental performance consultant certification, right? Like that journey is like, oh my God, it took me 3 to 4 years, all in. And it was like, I did it. I did it. And it was like, I got to appreciate it and really immerse myself in it, which a lot of people don't get that opportunity in adulthood. And we take it for
Yeah.
granted when we're 18, 19, 20 years old. And now we're like, hey, this is really cool, even though I suck at this in the beginning.
Well, and I think too, it's a great example to bring to the people. To I mean, I think you do too. I work with a ton of adolescent athletes, mostly youth
Yes.
athletes, not exclusively, but the majority of them are young, and to be able to be a walking example of, you don't have to have life figured out when you go to college, when you graduate from college. You might change your mind, and that's perfectly okay. All of these decisions lead up to future experiences, and you don't really know which doors are going to open when and what experience you have that's going to open some future door, and to be this walking model of you don't have to have it all figured out right when you go to college or when you graduate from college, and that's okay, I think is a important, I don't know, message to send.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting. I just literally just got a message in the last like 3 or 4 days from a client of mine. I haven't seen him probably in a few months, but we worked together through the summer, and he's a high school athlete, and the weight, the pressure of what he was going through athletically was really challenging him, and so much so that he decided to step away from his sport. And like I was like, you got to do what's best for you. It's not the end of the
Mm-hmm.
world if you take some time for yourself, because really at the end of the day, it's about you being happy, right? And enjoying your life and enjoying your sport. And if you're not, like, what's the point? And he came back to me like, just recently and said like, like the ability to step away and really like taking from the conversations that we had, like I'm moving back toward it in a better way. And I feel good about it. And I was like, yeah, I think there is something to be said for our experience, in like walking away from something that we had literally invested in for tens of years in terms of our education, and like starting from the bottom and building up in a career and getting to a point where you're
Mm-hmm.
probably making some decent money. And now you're stepping away from that and going back to nothing. Right. And you're
Yeah.
completely humbling yourself, but it's okay. Like that's part of the journey and it's okay. And if we can impart that lesson to athletes, because I think there is this natural, especially with the adolescence, the high school age, there's this natural sort of like impending or clock ticking with them about what's next. What's next? Am I going to go play in college? Am I going to go pro? And they feel the weight of that.
100%.
And it doesn't necessarily mean like if you don't go to the Division I college you want to go to when you're 18 and you go to JUCO or you transfer or you step away and come back. I mean, it's never over, right? You can always have a chance to go
Yes.
back. And I think that's really important.
Yes, I completely agree.
Yeah. Now, is there anything, and I know you have an athletic background as a volleyball player. So is there anything from your athletic background that like inspired or motivated you to get into the field? Because I know there was for me.
All of it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I played, actually, way back when I was really little, before I sprouted up to a prime 6'1", I was a competitive gymnast. I always think that's a funny place to start, considering how tall I am now. I certainly look absolutely nothing like a gymnast, but I was a competitive gymnast until about 12,
Okay.
and my body was just said no. It's like, this is not for you, Anna. I had injuries head to toe, wrist, braces on every single joint possible, it seemed like. And so I remember that when I made the transition from being a competitive
Mm-hmm.
gymnast to competitive volleyball, my dad just kindly said to me at the time, like, hey, there's this club volleyball tryout this weekend. Do you want to go check it out? And so that was how I got started in playing competitively myself. But my interest in the sport really grew out of watching Carrie Walsh play indoor volleyball at Stanford. My dad and I used to go to those games,
Really? Okay.
and it was it. That's how I fell in love with the sport. I was watching her play, and it was this just bonding experience with my dad. And it's like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
And so he kindly nudged me in that direction. I left gymnastics, and I played volleyball only like highly competitively for about 4 years. And I think looking back on it now, part of what motivated me to go into this field is that I wasn't part of a very supportive team culture of the variety of teams I was on. It ultimately completely burnt me out of the sport. I didn't effectively recover from injury. I didn't have coach support. I didn't have good teammate dynamics. I had no idea what to do mentally to keep myself in it. And I just said, I'm out. And I think if I had had somebody um, like you or me as part of that support when I was 15, 16, and that kind of person had been part of the programs I was in, it would have been a completely different story. I think I could have maintained the love, maintained that mindset of just growth and development and joy. But it so quickly became a business, and at such a young age. And when I didn't when I didn't do exactly what the program wanted me to do, it 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 was the right choice at the time for me to leave. Let me just put it that way. And
Yeah.
so I stopped playing after my freshman year of high school.
Wow.
That was my last year of club volleyball. But I still loved the sport so much. Like I ended up throughout college, I played for fun. I played in rec leagues. I became really good friends with a lot of the people on the men's volleyball team and the women's club team. And I would just go and like hang out and practice with them and play intramurals with them. So I really found ways to keep the sport interwoven in my life. And
Sure.
then as an adult, I played in a variety of women's and co-ed volleyball leagues. And I really ultimately stopped playing over a decade ago after having my rotator cuff surgery. So it's like I had, as an adult, I had the quintessential of volleyball shoulder surgery and kind of realized, okay, that's my cue. That's my cue to bounce.
Well, but I give you credit because I think what you described is you leaving the travel, culture, the travel program you were in or programs on your own of your own volition, right? It was your choice, which I think that is absolutely the exception, not the rule. And the sense I
Yeah.
get, because I don't know much of anything about volleyball, only what I've learned in the last couple of years, just observing from the outside looking in, is that it is a very, very stressful culture. And frankly, based upon what I observe from parents and hear from parents, can be a toxic culture, right? But there's a
Yep.
pressure of, I need to stay in this because we've invested so much in it, particularly the travel, the money,
Yep.
going all over to these tournaments. And it's like, well, we can't cut our losses. We got to keep going. But meanwhile, it's
Yeah.
at the expense of the wellness and the mental well-being of this young person who's like, getting beaten up by the system. And so, the fact that you were able to step away is pretty impressive. But I'm sure also if you look back on it, you're like, I wish I could have continued to go if I had the resources to do it.
Yeah. And I think it was the mental and emotional resources
Yeah.
to do it,
Yeah, that's
especially.
why. And
And
exactly. Right.
yeah, and it's, I see the potential for a completely different path had the culture been more supportive, had the team dynamics been more effective, had the individual level mental skills been taught.
Yeah.
And so that became this huge motivator to be the person I needed when I was a teenager.
Yes.
And
Well, yeah.
I echo what you said. I hear about these cultures and coaches and pressure and so much going into, I mean, and this isn't unique to volleyball, but the pressure to perform at a certain level in your high school years so that you can get that scholarship money or what have you to
Mm-hmm.
go to college. And it is a big pressure cooker. And that's so much of, it's a part of what I work on with the people that I
Yeah.
see.
Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Like, I think, it's certainly a driver of why people like us exist. But
Yeah.
sometimes I can't help but like question at times, when I'm in my really quiet moments of like, why do people like you and me have to exist? Like, why are things so crazy that there needs to be mental health, mental performance professionals who are in there sort of just like mitigating the stress and the risk in the system rather than changing the system. And it just, I think the truth of the matter is that some of it's just human nature. Because when I played sport in high school, I was above average and I was competitive and I loved what I did, but I also put a lot of pressure on myself. But I didn't live in a culture where everybody played travel baseball all year round. And I didn't live in a family where my parents didn't care or know about any of this stuff. They didn't know about college. So for me, it was all on me and I did it to myself. And so the truth of the matter is even without the system we have, we still have individuals who really put pressure on themselves to be the best they can be because they're investing in it. So like I almost feel like you're never going to change the system. So we're here to sort of be the check, right? Put the perspective into the system so that people can continue to do what they love and not burn out and not walk away and maybe even worse, right? So like
Yeah.
talk to me about like some of the things that you do in your work and some of the issues that you deal with and how you've learned to sort of get better at working with the athletes that you work with?
Yeah, that's a doozy of a question. I'll so I'll start by saying that a bulk of the work that I do is with indoor volleyball athletes and beach
Mm-hmm.
volleyball athletes. However, they're very different sports,
Yeah.
and they have a pretty different sport culture. And I know we had talked about that part of our theme for today was navigating transitions, and the transition from an indoor volleyball player to a beach volleyball player, which is what a lot of beach players do come from the indoor game. That is a very, I don't want to say intense transition, but the sport cultures are very different. So when I'm working with a beach volleyball athlete who has recently made the transition from the indoor team,
Mm-hmm.
it's a really the work becomes it becomes more individual focused and what I mean by that is the beach volleyball game is so there's a lot of focus on individual development and who am I going to pair with, and at least at the youth level versus the indoor teams. Indoor volleyball is much more of a team and like collective focus and focus on external. I see a lot of my athletes wanting external validation. They feel like they have to prove themselves to coaches. They feel like they
Mm-hmm.
have to prove themselves to their teammates. They don't want to let their teammates down. There's a lot of how do I look to the people around me? And not to say that doesn't exist in the beach game, but it's a different perspective. And it's a lot of how do I get people to play with me at the youth level? How do I develop the skills and get seen by the right people because the club scene is different. You're not on a team that you travel with all the time. So it really depends on where the athlete is in their well in their sporting
Sure.
career and what their goals are, but a lot of it is navigating that sense of external validation and shifting their perspective to be more internal and to be able to validate themselves, to be able to see for themselves how am I building and growing and developing confidence regardless of what people say, regardless of what college coaches think. Do I feel good about me?
So is it now this is me trying to understand, is it a matter of people leaving the indoor game completely and moving and shifting to focus on the beach game, or are they sort of rotating between the two in season?
It it's both.
Okay.
It's both. I have a couple clients who have gone completely. They started indoor. They didn't like that the culture of the programs they were a part of, and
Mm-hmm.
went to the beach game and have thrived. And I have some clients who do both. They have their indoor programs. They have high school. They have their indoor club, and then the beach season comes at the end. It's more of a spring sport, so they kind of go all the year round with all different
Mm-hmm.
um, with both. And so it ultimately depends on it certainly depends on the athlete. And a lot of times you'll see beach being used as cross training for indoor athletes and just a
Right.
way to stay engaged and work year
Yeah.
round.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have you don't I don't think you have to be an expert to understand that the differences between the games are very different, just in terms of like the surface you're playing on, the muscles that you're
Oh
using,
my god.
the space, and
Yeah.
it like and the cooperation. Right, you have more people in an indoor game. You only have two in beach. Right, you're jumping all this stuff, and so I would imagine it could be a really great advantage to do both. Um,
Yeah.
but I also could see how people would specialize in one because they feel like, hey, I need to only focus on one to get better. If I do this, it's going to be a waste of my time. Some of that I would imagine, and just based on what what I know is that like I think people have those fears about, am I, what's going to allow me to be the best, right? And that's a
Hmm.
relative term.
Yeah.
And do I want to lose a momentum, or do I want to get away from playing indoor because I'm going to, lose momentum, or a coach is not going to be happy, or whatever, right? Like I would imagine like you're helping with some of your athletes with those decisions about what's best for them, and validating it or helping them think through that process.
100%.
Yeah.
I always tell my parents this, my athletes' parents this
Okay.
when we meet, but also the athletes themselves talking about the future. I love those discussions because it's just an authentic conversation. You get them to reflect on what's important to them because there's all I feel like athletes these days, especially the kiddos, you get input from so many different sources,
Hmm.
right? You've got a lot of them they've got strength and conditioning coaches, they have multiple coaches on their team, they've got their parents, they've got their teammates, like what their peers are doing. And so I always like to open up to give them time during our session to just let it all sink in and be like, do you, what do you
Hmm.
want? You know, so let's say you're talking to these different D1 coaches and like, do you want to spend 4 years in that particular location? Like, let's put aside you
Right.
know, the characteristics of it's like think about the decision from all these different angles and to just give them the time to reflect on what do I want? Because I think sometimes they don't always have that space. And I think it's just to create that space that we
Yes.
do, just think about like what's important to you.
Yeah. I mean, I think you just nailed something that is probably one of the most important things that I talk about with athletes is, to say it another way, and I will frame it for this way for the athlete is like, why are you doing this? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you in this place putting in all this time and all this energy only to feel conflicted, only to feel, you know, down on yourself, only to feel like, you're giving something up, right? And it's like it's okay to not want it, but it's also okay to want it, but like start to like unravel why you want it so that you can keep going and do it with a smile on your face. It comes up so often. Like, why are you spending 30, 40, 50 hours a week spending, your parents are spending thousands and thousands of dollars to do this if you
Yeah.
don't love it? Or to your example, why am I going to this college? Well, because they're giving me the biggest scholarship. Okay. Obviously that's a factor for a lot of families, but now you have to
Absolutely.
live in this place for 4 years. Now you have to play for this coach. Now you have to be with these teammates. Now you have to like deal with this academic environment. If that doesn't work for you, you're not going to be happy because you're human. All those factors influence you. It's not just, hey, I got a scholarship. And I think
Right.
a lot of people just don't think about it that way. They don't think about the fit of the program. They don't think about their well-being. They think
Yeah.
only about the sport. And that to me is, that can lead to a crisis, ultimately, because you're making
Right.
choices for the wrong reasons.
And I like to think that we help in sort of the prevention of those to an
Yes,
extent. Like let's talk about
absolutely.
it now so it doesn't become as big of a problem later on. Like let's think through all of this. And honestly, that's some of the most fulfilling work because you start to just help them make choices for themselves. And it's not just let me teach you how to build confidence, let me teach you how to focus or to breathe. It's how are you integrating this so you can be a young adult human in a
Yeah,
few years. Like, I
absolutely.
love that work.
Yeah, and just sort of having looked over your website, which I really think is great. You talk about being sort of a holistic practitioner, right? Like really looking
Yeah,
at everything about the person. And I would describe myself in a very similar way. Like the
yeah,
person's got to come first for me because it's so much more to them than just athlete. And I think what happens is when people come to see me, it's inverted that the athlete portion of their identity is so large relative to everything else that they look at. Every decision is made through that lens. Every feeling or every thought they have is made through the lens of, hey, like this is the most important part of me. And if I'm not good at this or this isn't working, like that means I'm a bad person. And that is a really heavy burden to bear. And to be able to create the
right.
space to talk about that and just acknowledge that that's there and then build the awareness to start to make those changes so that life can be a little bit easier. I mean, I could see you sort of reacting to that.
Yeah, it's. I think some of the most effective work I do, or that I feel like I've done in the past,
Hmm.
is when you start to incorporate that. You help an athlete do the work outside of their sport. It's like practice this just in life, not just when you go to a race or when you go to a meet or you go to a tournament. Like, practice this
Hmm.
when you wake up in the morning. How you talk to yourself, for instance, matters regardless of what you're doing,
Right.
whether you're an athlete or not, whether you're right. But we can't do that as effectively if we're not trying to learn who we're working with from all these different angles. And
Yeah.
I think that's the most important work, is when you start to get them or help them realize that they can help themselves in all these areas of their life.
Yeah. So, and I think that speaks to the idea that every client that we have is unique, right? And that I think that's one of the
Totally.
tenets that I think we can agree is something that practitioners looking at every person individually, and you have to understand them and assess them that way. But, and I'm going to ask this question specific to volleyball athletes: are there like things that often that you see come up typically or come up repeatedly in terms of the issues that the volleyball athletes that you're working with face?
Yes, and I will say this with the caveat that I don't think this is necessarily specific to volleyball,
Okay.
but I see a few very common threads through the athletes I work with, most of whom are volleyball players. And one is how to respond to mistakes and how to unravel that sense of perfectionism. If I make a mistake, then that means I'm a bad player, or that means I'm not going to get playing time. That means my teammates are mad at me. And how to unravel that sense of just, no, that's not true. So to counterbalance the criticism that is so intertwined with their mental stories
Hmm.
is a huge thing that I work on frequently with my athletes. I
Hmm.
don't think that that's unique to volleyball,
No,
but
it's not.
I see it in almost all my volleyball
Okay.
players, beach and indoor. And the other thing is this overfixation on winning. And again, I do not think this is in any way specific to volleyball, though I do see it a lot. Is this sense of being afraid to lose, and
Hmm.
how that affects how they play when they are down a few points, or if they walk into a game thinking this team's really good, we can't beat them.
Oh my
So
goodness. It's my least favorite. It is the most confounding thing to me. And I see this as a parent. I see it as a mental performance coach. I've seen it as a volunteer coach. The idea like, oh, these guys are, or these girls are really good. We're going to lose because we're not as good as them. And it's like, we didn't even play the game yet. One, two, you can only control what you do. So who cares who's on the other side? Just go play. And it seems so intuitive, but it's something that comes up so much.
yes, and I had a person tell me once, Anna, you're not competitive enough. You're telling me not to think about winning, and I'm like, okay, I obviously need to shift how I talk about this, because I didn't sell it right to that one person. But ultimately, it's this sense of whether the game is 0-0 or 23-24, and it's the match winning point. You need to be focused
Just on,
the same.
right?
It's like you're still in one moment. You need to do your best for that moment. Don't
Right.
look at the score. And I just remember an
Mhm.
athlete told me, Anna, I have to look at the score. And I'm like, okay, this is a bigger conversation to have
But
separately.
no, but I love that you're talking about that, because I think it's something that I've gone through as well. And the distinction that I've broke through on for me is I was always of the bias of winning and losing don't matter. And I realized this more as a parent than anything. Winning does matter to kids. The question
Mm-hmm.
now is not whether or not winning matters, it's why does it matter so much? And that to me leads to the does it matter so much because that individual person, that kid, really believes that it matters so much to them in their life? Or is it because they're trying to make somebody else happy, or somebody else has told them that it's so important that you win that they've co opted that it's like they've adopted that thought and that feeling from somebody else. They feel like I can't let them down, versus like if I were to just lose, I would probably walk away and just go on living my life. But because this adult over here is telling me I need to win, and if I'm not happy, if I'm happy when I lose, then there's something wrong with me. Then all of a sudden it's different, right?
100%. That is such a good point, Mike. Just that sense of what is entwined with that sense of winning. Why? Yes, like yes.
Yeah. And I think so. The other thing I think I've realized as well is, and this is really more experiential from the last couple of years, working with athletes and across a variety of sports, whether it's baseball, soccer, basketball, individual sports, whatever. Like a lot of these clubs, now they're private, they're for profit, and the way they market their club is wins and losses. Therefore, if the club is not winning, then it potentially they're losing money. So it becomes like we have to win because we need to win this tournament so that we can go stick it up on our website so more people will come to the club. And the people who run those clubs or coach those teams may not even realize that that's what they're doing, but they're creating this culture of it's a winner else, and the kids are wearing it. And a lot of kids are either quitting or they're leaving these programs, they're rotating around because you're not teaching them the right lessons. And unfortunately, we are then thrust into the equation of how do I teach or rewire, frankly, or reprogram the thinking so that they can go into this with perspective to say, hey, it's okay if you lose as long as you've done everything you can to win, right? Because there's only so much you can control. That's not an easy thing to do as a professional.
Well, and especially not when you're working with athletes who are in a system that is saying it's not okay to
Right.
lose. To Because they're starting to get these conflicting messages.
Yes.
And this sense, like what I've seen a lot of is how clubs advertise their college commits. Again, I'm working with a lot of youth athletes, and so when I had several athletes this past fall who wanted to switch which club they played for, but they've been playing for this one club for many years. And so now they're thinking about switching, and they have to look at, well, am I going to get on the right team to get seen by the right college coaches to be recruited to the right? And they're not even in high school yet.
Yeah.
And they're looking at, well, if I go to this club, what colleges can I go to? And I guess there inherently isn't anything wrong with that. I guess it just puts the pressure on so outcome thinking.
Yes.
So much outcome thinking, and not just, hey, are you going to enjoy your experience of getting better as an athlete playing for this person or playing for this club?
Yeah. And there's a lot of comparison, and that's definitely something I see in social media because we were talking about this before we started recording. For instance, a predominant number of my clients are New Jersey based baseball players. Okay. In that world, if you're in social media paying attention, which I do now because I'm just curious about what goes on and I want to see, sort of what's happening, there's so much comparison. Joe Smith is going to play here, and Joe Smith plays on the same club as Johnny Johnson, and Johnny Johnson doesn't have an offer yet to go play at Division I level. So Johnny Johnson now feels crappy about himself because his teammate is now going to play Division I and he doesn't have an offer. And does that mean he stinks, or does that mean that he's not going to get it, or does that mean like he's just not good enough? Like there's this whole world of like in your face public comparisons, and I have to imagine it's very similar in volleyball and even other sports. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, because you have talked about parents, and let's call it adults. Like, what do you see from the adults who are in that community that you operate in that is good and maybe is not so good? And like, how do you manage that as a professional?
On one hand, I see so many adults who want to do the right thing. I would not be in this profession if there were not parents who wanted to give their kiddos all the resources possible for their own personal development.
Mhm.
I think that is amazing. I feel privileged. Every single athlete I work with, I see as an honor and a privilege that I am on their athletic journey. They picked me. And that, I think that is a huge step of, especially if you have parents who they I think a lot of them have told me, like, my kid won't talk to me about this stuff, but I know they need to talk about this stuff with somebody, and that somebody needs to not be attached to the sport organization, and they can't be a family member. So will you work with them? Right. And so I see that as a huge benefit and a great thing. Not just because it feeds my business. That aside, because these kiddos are getting resources early on in their lives that they get to then work on and have for the rest of their lives. And
Mhm.
that is beautiful. I don't remember
It
seeing that
is.
like when I was a kid. I'm sure like it certainly wasn't around as much, or as the conversation was not open in nearly the way it is now.
Yeah. I love
And I
that because it's
love seeing that.
your experience is exactly similar to mine, which is to say that conversation of my kid needs to talk to somebody who's not connected to this, somebody who's objective, somebody who doesn't have a dog in the
Right.
fight. And to the
Yeah.
parents' credit, they understand, like, I just want my kid to be happy. I just want my kid to be able to like not carry this burden around all the
Right.
time because I can't help them the way they need to be helped. Or like, no matter what I do or no matter what I try as a parent, it's still not good enough because of the dynamic. Because my primary role is to be a caregiver, to be somebody who's there to make sure
Right.
that I'm stay alive and I thrive. Sports further down the chain, it muddies the picture, and I see that myself as a parent. So a lot of times people ask me that question, and I'm curious to hear your opinion. Like when people talk to me, like, well, I'm sure you, I mean, not to be stereotypical, but they'll say like, I'm sure you get some crazy parents. And the answer I give is usually no, because the ones who come to me know or are aware enough to know that A, their kid needs somebody, and B, they can't do it. The crazy parent, right, to say that, and I've actually heard that someone's used that phrase recently on my podcast. I don't love it because parents love and care about their kids. I think they just get over invested in sport. But the parent who's over invested doesn't see, like they get blinded by that. They don't think that their kid needs to talk to somebody because everything's okay, or if they were to talk to somebody, that might look like there's something wrong with the kid, so we're not going to do that. I mean, is that similar to what you see?
I I agree with you. I think almost all of the parents in my practice, right? The parents
Yes.
of the kiddos that I have in my practice are incredibly supportive and not they're supportive parents. They want the best for their kids, and they they want what's best for their kids, not so that their kids can go get into a school, but so that their kids can feel good about what they're doing, whether that means they stay in the sport or leave. And so I wouldn't say I have any quote unquote crazy parents, and I don't like that term either. And
No, I don't
I'm
like it.
trying to think of a different way of
Right.
putting, like, the helicopter parent, I guess, is another way I've heard it. And perhaps that's just speaks to the newness of my own consulting practice. I don't know. I feel like maybe
Right.
there will be a time when there is a very over involved parent that is part of in the family of an athlete I'm seeing. But right now it's not my experience, and I don't know if that's normal or very atypical. Um, but currently, it's not my experience.
Okay, so I have two more questions as we're sort of running out of time here. So
Yeah.
on that note, how do you involve parents in the process?
This is an ongoing process, is a way to put it, because it is a very delicate line to. I don't have a great process for it yet. Let me just put it out that way.
Me neither. So
Basically,
I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Neither do I. I was
yeah,
curious.
it's Honestly, I stay general is the best way to put it, I suppose. Is, I see the athlete, their kiddo is my client,
Yeah.
and I operate with full confidentiality. And however, if I need to, I will get a parent who will email me or text me and be like, hey, this happened, like, can you talk to so and so about it? And it's in those moments where I'm like, well, I have to think through, how do I bring this up with the kid? Like, I don't want them to think I'm talking with the parent behind their back, but I
Right.
also really value what a parent's observations and what they bring to the table. And so I've actually been thinking about switching to a more like partial confidentiality with the permission of clients, so that there's a bit more of a two-way street, not in a, hey, so and so told me this today, let me go tell your parents about it, but to create a bit more of an open pipeline of communication to the parent that just says, hey, we're working on these general topics.
Yes.
And so sometimes I do that by email anyways, and I tell that to the kid, like, if I need to talk to your parents, I keep it general. I'm not telling them specifically things that you tell me.
Right.
It,
That's
it's it's
exactly what I
challenging.
do. Yeah, it's exactly
Okay,
what I do
yeah.
now. Because I do feel an obligation at times, and it's not systematized right now, but I definitely feel an obligation to communicate with parents about what we're working on and how things are
Same.
going. And but the thing that I've been thinking about and I'm thinking about moving towards is incorporating some sort of family session into
Mm-hmm.
the equation where it
Yep.
wouldn't be as frequent as one to one, but it might be one to four, right? Every fourth
Mm-hmm.
session, there's a family session. We talk about openly what's going on, what we're working on. Because I've had a couple of situations where parents have told me things on the side that I did not know, and I was not able to serve the young person as well as I could if I would have known it. And it is a
Yeah.
very, very fine line. But I've been reading articles recently about triangulation, right? How do I work in the parent's perspective, the coach's
Yeah.
perspective, the third party who sees something that is completely misaligned with what the young person's telling me? And I don't know who to
Yes.
believe, but at least if you know there's a disconnect, you can start to ask those questions in a non-invasive way to see, like,
Yeah.
is the adult just misperceiving things, or is the young person like deluding themselves into thinking everything's okay and they're
Yeah.
really having this problem that they don't want to share either consciously or subconsciously, right? That's been
Yes.
like one of the most complicated parts of figuring out how to work with young people, because they
Yeah.
don't necessarily have full agency in the process, just from the perspective of mom and dad are paying. In a lot of cases, mom and dad are asking them to come see me or you because they think they need it, versus the kids say, I really need this. So now all of a
Yeah.
sudden they're being sort of co-opted into this situation, and they're sort of like, yeah, you're my client, young person, but your mom and dad pay the bills. It is such a complicated and tricky relationship, and trying to find the best way to navigate that is really hard. Is
It
really
is.
hard.
And Mike, I could talk to you more. I know we're close on time, and I'm happy to talk to you more about this offline, because
Yeah, we should.
I've had conversations with other CNPCs on this exact topic, asking the exact questions, and I'd be happy to share more about what I'm
I would love
learning,
that.
and offer some resources. So definitely let's keep that line of communication open, because I am 100% in that exact same boat that you are experiencing.
Good to know. And I definitely, that's also been a struggle here. For me, actually, while we're recording here, I don't ever do this, but I'm gonna text my next appointment, let them know I'm running 5 minutes late so we can finish up. But so on that, yeah, I think that's one of the things I struggle with as a practitioner too, is isolation, right? Not
Oh my
collaborating with my
god.
fellow practitioners, and like
Mm-hmm.
getting so like isolated that I'm not really learning and I'm not growing and I'm not, getting that sort of peer consultation because of just the way the world works. And I think that there's so much value in that. And so to have this conversation, oh, by the way, on a recorded line is really cool and very valuable.
Yeah.
So with that being said, the last question I'll ask, and I ask everybody the same question, and I'll give you a little bit of wiggle room. The question is, if there's one thing, one piece of advice that you would leave for somebody who's listening, it can be a parent, it could be an athlete, what would that piece of advice be?
Ooh.
I know.
Okay, I will lead with this comes from a concept at the heart of my holistic practice, and it really gets to being self-compassionate. And it is not a term that a lot of athletes like because it sounds too soft.
Mhm.
But there's actually a ton of research that showcases the exact opposite. And that advice is to treat yourself like you would treat your best friend on and off the court. And I think that's geared a bit more toward an athlete perhaps than a parent, but
Sure.
treat yourself like you would treat your best friend. That goes to especially at how you would talk to yourself and how you would comfort and support yourself.
Yeah. I love that. And the way I frame the question to my clients is, would you talk to a teammate the way that you talk to yourself? And
Mm-hmm.
invariably the answer is no. And I think to go further, I think that applies to parents. As a parent and knowing a lot of parents who are in the space of youth sports,
Mm-hmm.
they beat the crap out of themselves because they think they're not doing enough for their kid. And the truth of the matter is that you're doing more than enough. And sometimes it's up to your kid or it's up to your coach or it's up to some other force to help things move the way they're going to move. And you don't always have to think there's more you can do because you're doing a lot. And I think it's a message that should resonate with parents as well. And I would say the same thing to them. So it's a
Yeah.
great piece of advice, a great way to end. I know it's a hard question, but it was wonderful to speak to you. It was so good to see you. I'm glad that you're
Likewise, Mike.
I'm glad you're doing well. I'm glad that you're out there fighting the fight like I am. And I think it's a great conversation for us to have and hopefully we could do it again sometime soon.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I feel honored, and it was great to see you and chat and to feel validated for some of the things that as another solo practitioner, it's like, oh
Yes.
yeah, we are. So to be continued, more conversations like this, please. It was very filling, and I appreciate you very much.
Thank you. Same. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bye bye.